It's NBS Television, your political command center. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're just tuning in right now, it's time for the breakfast meeting. Most of the time, information that you need pertaining the different organizations or even companies concerning, of course, could be clientele relations or could be anything that is, of course, a benefit to you at any one particular point. And this morning, as the Political Command Center, we're keeping tabs and following the updates from the oil and gas sector, which has been through a number of phases, from the exploration stage to the appraisal stage. And of course, right now, as we look forward to the final investment decision, which could be coming any minute, could be this month or even next month, but it has entered into now the field stages as we look forward to the production stages of oil in Uganda. But the big question is always, what is the role of the environmental agencies as far as oil exploration, especially when it reaches the production stages, is concerned? Which are these environment agencies? Because they have a lot of information that they need to tell you as Ugandans. And of course, I'm glad to be welcoming civil society. The civil society is here represented by Biodiversity Conservation's Uganda, also a member of the Civil Society Coalition on Oil and Gas. And we have the Executive Director, Mr. Twebaze Paul. You're welcome.
Yeah, good morning, viewers and online followers. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. And from the Uganda Wildlife Authority, the communications manager, that is Bashir Hanji. Good morning.
Thank you very much. Good morning and good morning, viewers.
Okay. Well, now the main focus of this show is to look at some of the environmental challenges that could be posed by the oil and gas projects so far, as we've been following since the exploration stages. But at the same time, how prepared are these agencies, probably before and of course going forward? And I'll start with the Uganda Wildlife Authority. If I come to you, Mr. Bashir Hanji, let's first try to understand the role of the Uganda Wildlife Authority as far as the oil exploration projects, oil and gas exploration projects are concerned, where the Uganda Wildlife Authority comes in, and of course your responsibility to Ugandans as these projects have been ongoing.
Thank you very much. First of all, we need to appreciate that the role of Uganda Wildlife Authority is enshrined in the environmental pillar of the oil and gas sector. Clearly spelled out in the National Oil and Gas Policy of 2008, which clearly has the resource pillar, the environmental pillar, and you have the finance pillar. So Uganda Wildlife Authority, being responsible for quite a number, for all the protected areas in the country, talk about national parks, talk about wildlife reserves, and being able to also monitor and offer technical guidance to community wildlife management areas. We have some parks that are forest parks. And if you look at like, the Albertine Graben, where we have quite a number of oil and gas activities taking place, this is a sensitive ecosystem. And therefore, the role of Uganda Wildlife Authority comes in handy to ensure that, one, the wildlife itself is protected, but also the habitat where the wildlife stays is also protected. So that's how we come in. And in so doing, we do quite a number of things. You see, with oil and gas, largely people will see the resource pillar in action. The regulator, here you have POW, and then you have the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development. Now, when it comes to the environment pillar, you have the lead agency in environment, which is the National Environment Management Authority. Now, this lead agency basically leads all the other agencies in the environmental pillar. And UWA plus others, they come in to backstop the lead agency. For instance, we monitor the activities of oil and gas, specifically looking at, with a focus on the impact of these activities, one, on the protected area, and I want to separate the two, and two, on the wildlife itself. What do I mean? What happens when you have oil and gas, and I really want to simplify this. What happens when you have oil and gas drilling, for instance? If you have a rig in a park, what happens to the wildlife around there? That's one. Two, but also what happens to the place itself. For instance, if they drill a well, let me say an appraisal well, and it's in a park. You know the process, you have a well pad, you have a rig, it has lights, you have movement of people and vehicles. What happens to that particular area where you have all these activities? Now, that's one thing, that's one area where we come in to monitor, to see what is the impact. And if there are impacts, how do we mitigate them? Because one thing we need to be clear about, you can never have any of these activities or any developments, by the way, without impacts. But the most important thing is, how do you try to mitigate so that they are not adverse? Now, we look at what happens to when you drill a well and then you go. Do you put in place adequate measures to minimize on the impacts? For instance, if you have maybe decommissioned and you are doing restoration, and when I talk about restoration, I want you to look at it from this way. You know, when the well pad, it's big, they come, they do excavations, they put their structures, and they put some containers where people are sleeping. Sometimes they put their rig, a lot of machinery. Now, when you remove all this machinery, how do you try to make sure that this place goes back to near original where it has been?
Without affecting.
Already there is an effect, there's no doubt. But the objective is to minimize.
To minimize the effect.
Absolutely. What do we do? Now that's where we come in, to say we are giving guidelines. When you're done with this, we want you to make sure that you do restoration. We don't want, for instance, you to get grass from outside the protected area and bring it inside, because it becomes an invasive species, you know, a species that is not indigenous in a particular place. And now that is how we come in. Then when it comes to the wildlife, we say, you have light. Because if you've been to a rig, you see they drill day and night, you know, and at night there's a lot of light around. What is the impact of this light on the behavior of animals?
Okay.
Do animals run away? And if they run away, what happens? Don't they go to communities and maybe we increase human-wildlife conflict? So we come in with measures. We say either you reduce the generator, if it is making a lot of noise, you say, can you have a silent one that doesn't make a lot of noise to scare wildlife? So that's how we come in to play a number of roles. The other thing we look at also...
Probably, maybe I'll come back to you later. I want to bring in the executive director from the civil society, Mr. Mwebaza Paul, a little bit so that we enjoy the conversation. It's interesting it's interesting what Mr. Hanji is talking about. But as civil society, from your assessment, since the exploration stages to where we are at the moment with the oil and gas projects and what Mr. Hanji is talking about, let's first take it back in terms of the information that probably Ugandans have as far as the environmental agencies are concerned. How has your assessment been? Have these agencies been doing something already before even we hit the production stages? Let's start from there.
Yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate the effort, of course, of the lead environmental agencies, NEMA, and of course, OA, and other partners like NFA. But of course, my colleague Bashir will also know that there are still gaps, specifically for information flow. You realize that the sector comes along with very, very, very technical information to the extent that it even excludes the rest of the public from understanding it. So you ought to be at a certain level to be able to understand the language used in the sector, especially when it comes to environment. There are a number of studies that have been done, both, of course, by the oil and gas companies under the guidance of the Petroleum Authority of Uganda and the other environmental agencies, and of course quite a lot in terms of trying to ascertain the likely impact that may arise from the oil and gas activities. But you realize that if, for example, you look at the environment and social impact assessments, this is information that should be going to the public because you cannot talk about protection of the environment without involvement of the people who are the owners of both the natural resources you're talking about and also who are supposed to know and give a hand in the protection of these environment and ecological resources. So as long as this information is not yet in the public domain, and as long as it is still in too hard and technical language for the people to understand, then we may keep the debate amongst ourselves. First of all, if you look at the level of disclosure of the information contained within the environmental impact assessments for all these projects, it's not in the public domain. And even the information that is there is a little bit difficult. Environmental impact assessments reports are public documents. We expect the public to read and understand, and even if possible, government should take an extra initiative of translating them in local languages, because this is information that must be consumed by the people. But my colleague Bashir realizes, and also has been actually part of the sector for long, he's also a victim of several circumstances. We have been grappling to understand some of these reports, even us who are a little bit technical. We also are still learning. So this creates an impression that the debate is for those who have specialized in the sector, and when actually the challenges, the environmental challenges, do not only affect those, they actually go up to the lowest person ever. I want to give you an example, Bashir. It's good we met, and there is a question you'll need to answer before we leave here. Quite often for us, we work with the communities, and these are the questions they actually send us to ask some of you when we meet. In Noya, residents are complaining for frequent attacks from the elephants. And for them, their thinking is that the frequency of the elephant visits and destruction of their crops is as a result of disturbance of the oil and gas activities in the Makshan Falls National Park. And there has not been any serious explanation to tell the people of Noya what is the cause, because they have not seen these elephants before. They see the elephants increase during the time when there was active exploration activities. They were coming too much to the communities and continue to destroy crops. So this is the information that people need. And for example, when are they supposed to stop? Is it supposed to continue, or what should they do? So some of this information is very key, because as you create ecological disturbance, of course, at the end of the day, what happens is that you create things like wildlife conflict, human-wildlife conflict, and it's the people that suffer at the end of the day. The people in Burisa, for example, the other day they were saying the conditions in terms of climate have changed drastically. It is now, the temperatures are too high, and they are associating this with associating it to the oil and gas activities. And as long as there isn't any sufficient information to tell them that there are other factors that could explain this, it's not about the oil and gas activities, soon you get a problem, because they will tell you, they will blame you on everything that comes up. So much as we speak as civil society try to explain, we think that there is a hand missing from the authorities.
Okay. That's Mr. Chimwebaze. Paul is the Executive Director representing civil society in our conversation this morning. And before you answer that question, Mr. Hanje, I want to bring in the National Forestry Authority Manager, Geographic Information Systems, that is Mr. John DC. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. And you're very welcome as you greet our viewers. Before you even comment on what Mr. Chimwebaze is saying, I would want you to explain your role as the National Forestry Authority in the management of the oil and gas sector, and your active role in this case as far as the environment is concerned.
Thank you for having me, and good morning, viewers. Just apologize that I've been late due to unavoidable circumstances. Yeah, National Forest Authority is the institution mandated to manage national central forest reserves. We have forests outside forest reserves. We have some in the national parks. We have some on private land. But NFA is mandated to manage forests or to manage central forest reserves, whether they are forested or not. Now, regarding the topic of what we are doing regarding oil and gas activities, we have one central forest reserve which is exactly inside the Albertine Graben, which is called Masigi, but others are just outside on the escarpment. We have big forest reserves like Budongo, Bogoma, and others, Bujawe. So those forests will play a big role in the environment now and in future when oil and gas activities have intensified in terms of absorbing carbon. Absorbing carbon from the environment. We have an airport being constructed just near Bogoma Forest. The emissions which will be coming from that airport should be absorbed by such a forest. So our objective is to maintain what we have, the forest that we have in the Albertine Graben, and then encourage even the people to plant more trees, because there are so many activities of oil and gas, like road construction, for instance, going on right now. All those produce emissions. But again, we expect a population increase in the area due to those oil and gas activities. And those people will need to eat, those people will need to cook food, those people will need housing. That means more demand for firewood, more demand for timber. So our job is now to make sure that those goods and services are in place. Yeah.
Okay. So Mr. Tumwebaza talked about the ecological disturbances, but it was way wider than that, because at one point he mentioned, asking Mr. Hanji, how do you say you're going to be protecting Ugandans when the people you're protecting are not actually involved? And as I bring you back, Mr. Hanji, so the question is Uganda Wildlife Authorities within the communities to do this sensitization that Mr. Tumwebaza is saying is actually lacking? He described it in a couple of ways. He said some of this information concerning the environmental challenges or what is yet to come or what is already happening is actually excluded from the people, and some of it is so technical that they don't even understand it.
That's correct. That is a good one. I want to make this very honest statement. One of the biggest undoing lately of the management of oil and gas sector in Uganda is what we call interagency collaboration, which is lacking. It's not where it's supposed to be. Right now, Uganda Wildlife Authority, what do we do? We have what we call community conservation wardens. These are based in protected areas. You go to Queen, you find them there. When you go to Makshon, you find them there. And in fact, in Makshon, even we have a warden responsible for oil and gas activities to monitor oil and gas activities and then inform management in terms of what action can be taken. But you see, if I go to communities in Noya and I explain about what Uganda Wildlife Authority is doing in terms of ensuring that the oil and gas activities do not adversely affect wildlife and protected areas, it is not enough. It is not enough because environment goes way beyond that. What about the bigger environment? Look at a situation where our community people, because to answer your question, yes, we go to communities, but we restrict ourselves to our mandate. And this is where I'm saying that we have a challenge, because each institution comes with its own mandate. My mandate is to do this, my mandate is to do this. And you can imagine if you go as a team You have someone from OA, you have someone from NFA, someone from NEMAD, which is lead now in terms of environment countrywide, and you are engaging people. I think they would be going home with rich information, and they get a holistic picture, which is lacking. Therefore, you go to Noya, someone will tell you that, okay, people in where they came and they told us that, you see the elephants, the way they are moving out, doesn't have to do more with oil and gas. Maybe it could be an issue of population increase, but now that is only OA. What about the forest reserves? What about the lead agency now that's going to talk about water pollution, air pollution, and all these? So that is the problem. And therefore, information is going out in piecemeal. I will go engage. My colleague from civil society will go, they also engage. And you know the engagement, I've worked with this guy for some time. Their method of engagement is usually different. I don't want to go into those details, but their engagement...
Speak to the people.
Yeah, but their engagement is usually different. But you see, when he goes and he engages, I go, I engage. He goes, he engages. A colleague from NEMA also goes, engages in the same committee. You see, in communication, there's what we call information overload. People reach a point where information is too much. I'm telling them, this one is coming, he's telling them something a little different.
Unlike when it's one direct message from all the agencies at once.
Absolutely. So that is the problem. People get confused. How I explain things is not how he explains it. Because he explains from a point of reference of his institution. I explain from a point of reference of my institution. And someone like that, civil society the same. So people are confused. There is a lot of information, a lot of messages for them to consume. But they can't consume all this information at a go. They also have other things to do. That's why sometimes you go, you call a community meeting, people don't come. People turn up, we expect 100 people, you get 20. They are tired. I come today, I engage them. He goes tomorrow. The other people will tell you, look here, we have some other things to do. So yes, there is information that is lacking, but the reason is simple. There is no interagency collaboration in terms of communicating. Largely, the lead agency in terms of communicating on oil and gas is the resource pillar. Here you can talk about the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development and the power. But when it comes to environmental matters, I strongly believe that for as long as agencies communicate on their own piecemeal in silos, people will get confused the more.
But at the end of the day, the impact still is felt.
Absolutely.
By them, by Ugandans, yes. Because if this continues, and that is where I want National Forestry Authority to
you didn't want me to conclude on his question about the elephants in Noya?
So that you answer it there, then okay, all right, and then we bring in.
Yeah, you know, this is something that has been ongoing. From 2009, we had a lot of increased human-wildlife conflict in the country, from 2009. And the general thinking was that it's because of oil and gas activities that are happening inside protected areas. But there was no anything really to prove to us that it's this. But also, and this goes back to what I said about interagency collaboration. Because of this, a study was done to find out. And even working with Total, we decided to collar elephants. You know, when you collar them and you are able to monitor where an elephant is at a certain time, to monitor their movements, to see how far they go, for instance, from the rig. And a study was done. Unfortunately, Uganda Wildlife Authority has not yet accessed this report. It goes to what he was saying, the issue of information sharing.
Okay.
I know that the IOC, when I talk of IOC, it's an international oil company. This is oil Total, Sinnock that we have today. So I know that the report was submitted to the regulator. In this case, it was the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, and I think it is in power. But in the environmental pillar, we as Uganda Wildlife Authority never accessed this report. But we also know that there's a general increase of wildlife in the country, especially in protected areas. If you look at, we had around, we had around 2,000 elephants in 1986. Now we are talking of about 8,035 elephants.
That's about an increase of 4,000?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Wow.
About 6,000 actually.
Yeah, 6,000.
Yeah. Now, that is a huge increase in terms of wildlife. But remember, the protected area size remains the same. But also there is another increase in human population and the exact pressure on the protected areas. So as the exact pressure, they encroach on protected areas, they go into areas that were hitherto animal corridors. Animals remember where they've been passing, you know. And when animals remember, they just, for them, they just come. They don't know that you have built there or you have your garden there.
True.
So this is also one of the reasons. But I don't want to rule out the fact that there are disturbances occasioned,
From the oil
occasioned by oil and gas activities. Those many vehicles, animals are not used to them, rigs and a lot of machinery around, they are not used to them. You know, so that one is something I cannot rule out.
Okay. And when you speak of that, as I bring you in, Mr. DC, then let's speak about the environment assessment impact reports that Mr. Tumweba was alluding to, saying that these are documents that are supposed to be public, but of course they stay within your offices and communities never actually get to be sensitized about some of these things. And if somebody comes across these documents, they're so technical and they can't even understand them. So let's start with that information gap, or even how technical they are and what particularly National Forestry Authority has actually done about this.
I think I want to look at it this way. Give information on the basis of need to know.
Need to know basis.
Need to know basis. Yeah. Who has just told you that sometimes there is information overload? Somebody comes, gives you an aspect of planning, spacing of children, another clean water, another one forestry, another one animal conflict, human life, humans and wildlife conflict. So there is a lot of information. And this is how government works. Government has so many institutions, and each one has its own mandate. So if you confuse them that this one should give everything, people will be confused or the information will not be effective. So let each institution give what is supposed to give. And because they know how to deliver that information. Now, the information, for instance, on water quality, the way water resources works on it, you're not going to tell the people down there about oxygen in the water or microbes in the water. They want water which they know is, you say this is safe water, but not the chemicals which are there. They're not concerned about that. So those are the things that are in the reports maybe he was talking about. Now, on the issue of collaboration of institutions, I don't think we should take it as that gloomy, that there is no collaboration between institutions. There are institutions in Uganda which work on the environment. For instance, Ministry of Water and Environment has departments of water resources. There is agriculture, there's fisheries, there is NEMA, there are Kawanda people on soils. So all those institutions which are responsible for the environment have been working together since like 2014, and they have produced a sensitivity atlas, which is a guide especially to the oil companies. So that when they are planning the activities, there are some areas they should avoid, or some things we call avoidance features. For instance, in the parks, we mapped like you can call them water holes or pools where these animals go and wallow, or breeding grounds. Now we have forest reserves, areas which should be avoided. Now, to give you an example that these instruments are working, in the planning for the ECOP, East African crude oil pipeline, which is taking oil from, which is going to take oil from Kabale to Tanzania and Tanga. It was planned in such a way that it was dodging forest reserves. It passed in only one forest reserve and just a small section, but all other forest reserves were missed, were dodged intentionally. So this is the use of these instruments which we made. And these were made by all the institutions of government, And even civil society, we had like WCS involved. Civil society also, NGOs were also involved. So there is some collaboration that is going on. Now, involving people in the management of these resources, we have a policy that communities surrounding forests should also participate in the management of forests, in forest reserves. And we call that collaborative forest management. And to create a CFM group, it takes time. Everything is explained to them, what the relationship means, and they decide what they want to get from the forests, the benefits they are getting, and then it is explained to them what they shouldn't do in order to have the forests managed well. So a group is formed, and that goes all around the forest reserve. There are small groups. They go in, they get firewood, they get building poles, they get water, and then they help us to protect the forests against illegal activities. Because we can't be there all the time, and they are always there. So, and then we cannot get people who are 10 kilometers away also to become members of the CFM. And this is what comes to what I was telling you, need to know or need to participate. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you. That's from the National Forestry Authority. And I want to bring you back, Mr. Chimwebaze. While Mr. Hanji said that the interagency collaboration is lacking, he begs to differ a little bit and says there's actually that collaboration seen with other environmental agencies, which he actually mentioned. He's saying need-to-know basis. He's emphasized it and said the information overload is not actually good for the communities, which means these environmental agencies have our best interests actually in protecting us. But I would also want to know what your alternative solutions are to better synchronize these environmental agencies as civil society.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want first to make this clear, that the need to know, giving or disclosing on the basis of the need to know, would even be a very tricky situation, because I don't know how you arrive on what information the communities would need and what they would not partake. So for you under information disclosure standards, you need to proactively disclose information and only wait for the information requests that come under reactive disclosure to be given when there is a request. But as a government institution, you're required to proactively disclose information. You cannot. So what you're saying is that
they can't assume that
people
overload.
Need this and they do not need this. That would be a risk assumption. Then the other important point I need to make here is that in line with interagency coordination, it's true. As civil society, actually, at one time we entered into a very serious marriage with these government agencies in terms of how we share information, even planning together. But sometimes we also get frustrated. I'll give you an example from his submission. He said that one of the major roles as Uganda National Forest Authority, they encourage people to plant more trees, to increase the vegetation cover, so that at the end of the day, this could help even in playing a big role as carbon sink. But now, if you look at what is happening currently, you get lost, because the government of Uganda, for example, under the Forest Investment Program, recently there was a government decision, we are borrowing money from the World Bank to invest in increasing the protection of forests and protected areas in the Arbata and Graben. But at the same time, we are cutting Goma forest. And you're actually giving an example that Goma forest is one of the ecological sensitive areas that will be helping us. When NEMA is speaking, they tell you, no, we are cutting a grassland. And you're cutting trees, yet you say people need to plant more. And you're again saying, borrowing money to plant more trees, that another agency is taking leadership in cutting. So which is which? So for me, as someone who works with people on a day-to-day basis, I'm supposed to provide information, raise awareness, and say trees are very good. People plant more trees. We go to Hoima, we tell the people to plant more trees, and they will tell us, which trees are you talking about? When you are even cutting the ones that already have been existing.
Right.
So you end up putting us in a very tricky situation to even convince the public to continue in that direction.
Mr. DC wants to come in the Mr. DC.
Yes.
Is that also...
So the information, for us, I thought, it is not about talking around. But even if you extend to other jurisdictions of NEMA, you have had areas where NEMA says this. We have had even directives for people to vacate wetlands, and at the end of the day, there is selective application of the law, as if some wetlands are more important than the others. Then the next day, they tell you this rice growing in this wetland is good, it is the other one which is bad. And as people of the Republic of Uganda, they don't draw very serious boundaries. When you make a statement, it should be uniform. If it is about protection of forests, my thinking is that we all protect. But when we move as one, and then some of the agencies start drawing feet, for us we get a serious problem. When you go to Risa and Hoima now and start telling people to plant more trees, they don't understand what you're talking about. The other day we were in another serious concern over Maction Forest. You know, the government plans to destroy the Maction Forest. And Bashir, I don't know even where the government position now is, but whereas then the next day you'll hear government plans to conserve, you will even talk about increasing rangers, you will talk about increasing protection of the Maction Forest, but then another day you hear that it is about to go. So we are worried, and this is where the public loses trust in most of the government agencies, not sticking to the same.
Mr. DC, comment on those conflicting loyalties. He asked, who are you for? Are you for Ugandans, or actually are you for, with the comment starting with the fate of Bugoma Forest?
Thank you, and Paul, thanks for bringing up that issue, because even me and my colleagues, it has been a pain. And let everybody know that there is a problem in Bugoma. First of all, Bugoma,
that is beyond National Forestry Authority?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Bugoma was gazetted in 1932. Everybody knows the boundary of Bugoma Forest. Bugoma Forest has remained as an island in that region, an island of forest. Now, there is no reason why government at the same time should issue a land title in Bugoma Forest. That land title shouldn't have been issued. Government at one time cancelled that title, but actually it was not cancelled. It is still there. As he said, we have borrowed money. Government has borrowed money. Others are grants to plant forests in the Albertine Graben. Yet we are there. We have allowed a sugar company to cut the forest to plant sugar. That shouldn't have happened. The environmental social impact assessment shouldn't have been approved by NEMA. Even according to the new Environment Act of 2019, changing a land use. Even in that SCI, it says that they are going to cultivate grasslands. There are no grasslands in Bugoma. There is a woodland and tropical high forest. So a woodland is what they called a grassland. And according to the classification of forests in Uganda, woodlands are forests. So there shouldn't have been a case of allowing any cutting of trees in Bugoma.
Okay.
Then you wonder, if there were no trees, if it was actually grassland, then where was the timber and charcoal coming from when they were cutting that forest?
From grass.
Okay.
Just a moment.
NEMA briefly, Mr. DC, yes.
Yes, NEMA has no capacity to monitor the document it sanctioned, the impact assessment, because that place is guarded by security forces. That shouldn't happen. You can't go there. So we see what's going there by remote sensing, by using satellites, but you can't step there. So the parliament, the office of the president, everybody should come and save Bugoma. This is a very serious issue, but it is something, part of it is still in court, so can't say a lot, but it is a sensitive issue.
And I'm glad we've had a little comment or statement even about it, but I want us to synchronize and bring back the conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Mr. Hanji, for
Yes.
me, yeah, because we have a few minutes, I need to know how the Uganda Wildlife Authority or Ugandans need to know how prepared you are now, because ahead of the production stage or even the field assessment stages right now within the oil and gas sector, they are actually yet to even pose a way more threat compared to the earlier phases that communities have been undergoing with these oil activities. So how prepared are you as Uganda Wildlife
Thank you very
Authority
much.
to protect the environment?
Yeah, Uganda Wildlife Authority is adequately prepared. But as I delve into this preparation, let me make this one thing clear. He agreed with me that we need some interagency collaboration, which is not there, which is lacking.
It is there, but
which is still lacking.
Exactly.
That's one. Two, when I talked of information overload, I meant that if you, instead of going as NFA, I go as OA, and we are going to the same communities, let's go as a team, because environment is cross-cutting, it's everywhere. Whether inside the park or neighboring the park or 30 kilometers from the park, what actually the difference is the level of impact. Someone who is closer is impacted more than someone who is a little bit far. You get me? For instance, if it's an oil spill, you don't expect someone in Kampala to feel its immediate impact. But someone who is near a park will feel the immediate impact of an oil spill. Now let me go to the preparation.
Before, Mr. Hanji,
Yes.
your communications person,
Yes.
and of course, Mr. DC here is the manager, Geographic Information Systems. Since you're seated together, when you say that let's go together as National Forestry Authority and Uganda Wildlife Authority, have these two organizations talked about this?
That's the discussion now that we need to take forward. That is the discussion that I'm saying.
So before this, you hadn't talked about probably having one going to these communities as entities?
No, that's not happening. That's what I'm calling for. I'm saying, going forward, for the benefit of the communities, instead of me going alone, he goes alone, someone from NEMA goes alone. Let's go as someone from the resource pillar or power or Ministry of Energy. Let's go together. We have one synchronized message. This one is talking about forests. This one is talking about protected area management, wildlife. This one is talking about other aspects. You are interacting with the communities as a team.
It shouldn't be so difficult.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But he talked about mandates. Mandates are killing us. But let me leave that.
Preparation.
Let me go to the preparations. As Uganda Wildlife Authority, one thing is that working together with them and other agencies, we developed sensitivity atlases for these protected areas, these sensitive ecosystems. And one thing is that we have put in place an environmental impact assessment unit in place. It is now headed actually by a manager, and we have staff in the park who monitor oil and gas activities on a daily basis. Yeah, so that we are able to know the levels of compliance. For instance, if NEMA issues a certificate, what are the conditions? And our role is to ensure that they adhere to those conditions when it comes to operations inside the protected area. The other thing we do is, you must have noticed that now we have put speed limits. We had a number of road kills initially because vehicles would drive as they wish and they are inside the protected area, so we put speed limits. You can't drive beyond 40 kilometers, we arrest you and we fine you. But by and large, there is an issue of something called capacity. And I want to talk about this issue of capacity. Whereas we have endeavored as an institution to expose some of our EIA staff to international conferences to see international best practices in oil and gas environmental management. The aspect, the resource pillar is supposed to build the capacity of all the other resources. Okay? And I'm not very sure whether from my sister agency, NFA, whether you have had your staff, their capacity built by the resource pillar to ensure that they are adequately prepared for two very important stages. One, the field development stages, where we are going to have a lot of activities happening, a lot of infrastructure being put in place, pipelines, we have central processing facilities, environmental, rather waste management facilities, a lot of stuff.
Okay, so Mr. Hanji, I want to give a minute.
He will.
No, because time is against us. I want to give him a minute to also talk about how prepared the Uganda National Forestry Authority is.
I don't want to be very pessimistic. In addition to the sensitive data I told you about, we have the Albertine Graben Environment Management Plan. Again, that one, we did it with all the institutions, including UA. In UA, there are friends I've been working with for over 10 years. And I know they are very well knowledgeable. So even at NFA, we have people who are very knowledgeable.
In oil and gas?
In oil and gas.
Oh, great.
For things which, and we learned along the way. When we started in 2014, we didn't know. But we keep on learning, and as each step comes, we keep on learning. And this applies to many government institutions. We are getting even external assistance to train people. So, for instance, if you go to Murchison Falls National Park, there are a lot of drilling that took place there, many drilling pads. But if you drive through Murchison Falls National Park and they ask you to locate where there was a well pad, you can't. The place was restored. So we are revising forest management plans. Some of them have already been revised, like to include oil and gas issues in the management of these forests.
All right. And as I bring you back, Mr. Tumwebaze from the civil society, we're coming to a conclusion of our conversation this morning. Going forward, as far as the role of environmental agencies and oil activities ahead of the production stages are concerned, what is your final say?
My final say is we must not hide from the truth. In a debate of this nature, you already realize that the two government agencies represented here are mentioning different levels and stages of preparedness. And if you start wondering whether one is supposed to work and whether another one is not supposed to play its role. So you start wondering, whoever built the capacity of NFA, why wouldn't he build the capacity of UA? Because this is what you see. My colleague says, for them, their capacity are built. Hanji says we still need more capacity development. But going forward, there is still, we are talking about sensitive stages, where we are going. And we may have had our capacities built previously for the exploration phase.
Absolutely.
And we should not take for granted this, because the capacities for exploration, the activities, and the environmental impacts at that stage are totally different from the phase we are joining. We have had, as civil society, actually for us, we take time to run fast. We have tried to look at most of the environmental governance tools and documents.
In 10 seconds, conclusion.
And we think these government institutions must also work up to speed. It's still an issue of capacity. When you look at the district natural resources and offices, they still cannot be able to perform their roles. Maybe if the capacities are actually centered at the headquarters, but we have these challenges.
All right, Mr. Hanji, your final say.
First of all, I want to thank the viewers, and I want to assure them that as we move forward in terms of field development and eventual production of Uganda's oil and gas resources, UWA is ready. Despite the capacity gaps, despite the challenges, we are up to the task. Because we want the oil, but also want to make sure that we get this oil in a sustainable way, and also want to ensure that our protected areas are not adversely affected, and want to ensure that we continue conserving Uganda's wildlife resources for generations.
Okay. And Mr. DC, your final remarks?
My final remarks, I also admit that there is need to increase capacity in all the institutions, especially for the forthcoming stages of production and development. But when that time comes, there is capacity the capacity will be built. You cannot cite anything a scandal that has happened in the oil affairs. The laws have been put in place. So I'm very confident that everything will go smoothly and we shall not suffer an oil curse.
Okay. Well, we do appreciate you, gentlemen from the National Forestry Authority. Mr. John DC is the Manager, Geographic Information Systems. Thank you so much. And then Mr. Bashir Hanji, Communications Manager, that is from the Uganda Wildlife Authority, and Mr. Paul Tumwebaze, representing the civil society, that is from Pro Biodiversity Conservations Uganda, also a member of the Civil Society Coalition on Oil and Gas. This breakfast meeting was organized by ACORD, and of course we were discussing some of the challenges posed by the oil and gas activities within the Albertine region ahead of the production stages and how prepared these environmental agencies are in protecting the environment and, of course, the communities within the area to benefit generally Ugandans. My name is Mebo Twegumiezake. You're still watching the breakfast meeting. We return with some good information from Stanchart, so stay with us.